Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into addiction,
Okay.
but we're going to be looking at it kind of from a new perspective.
Interesting.
And that is as a response to suffering,
Wow. Okay.
not the usual, moral failing
Yeah.
disease kind of a thing.
Yeah. The way it's usually portrayed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a huge shift.
In how we think about it.
So the material we're looking at basically suggests that addiction is not so much a choice, but rather a reaction to pain.
Interesting.
And usually like a really deep-seated pain.
Yeah, like a root cause kind of a thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that can be traced back to trauma,
Uh-huh.
especially childhood trauma.
Yeah, I mean, the research is really clear on that.
Yeah.
A lot of people who struggle with addiction have experienced some pretty severe childhood trauma.
It's a lot more common than
Mm.
people realize, I think.
Yeah, it's not just a coincidence, it's
Yeah.
a definite connection.
So it really
Yeah.
makes you think about, if we're so quick to judge these addictive behaviors,
Right.
are we really missing the bigger picture?
Exactly. Like, what's going on underneath?
Yeah, what's that underlying
Yeah.
cause?
What's fueling those actions? What's driving that behavior?
Right. So how does trauma actually make someone more susceptible? I mean, how does that actually work?
Okay, well, just think about it.
Okay.
When a child experiences trauma, especially at a very young age,
Yeah.
they often internalize that experience.
Right.
And they may blame themselves or feel incredible shame, or they might even develop this deep sense of worthlessness.
Yeah.
And these feelings don't just go away as they get older.
Oh, absolutely not.
They can really linger, and they become like this constant source of internal pain.
That's so sad.
It is, and it makes sense that someone who is in that much pain would try to find any way to escape those feelings.
Of course.
And that's where substances or these compulsive behaviors can come in.
Right. So it's like a coping mechanism almost.
Yeah, exactly. It's a way to just kind of temporarily numb that pain.
Yeah. Even if it's just for a little while.
Even if it's just for a short time. Yeah.
Right. But why those specific things? Why not like healthy coping mechanisms?
Yeah.
Like go for a run.
Sure.
Or, I don't know, talk to a therapist or something.
I mean, that's where the impact of trauma on the brain actually comes into play.
Okay.
Early trauma can really alter brain circuitry, particularly in the areas related to reward and pleasure. So for someone with a history of trauma, these substances or these addictive behaviors, they kind of hijack those reward pathways in the brain
Oh, wow.
and create this really powerful sense of relief.
And so then it becomes like a physical thing almost.
It does. It really does.
That's really interesting.
And it's really hard to resist,
So you're saying it's not just willpower,
No.
like just choose something else. Just
It's much more complicated than that.
Okay.
It's way more complicated.
Huh?
Think about trying to break any habit, even like a harmless one. We all know how challenging that can be.
Totally.
Now imagine that habit is literally tied to your brain's reward system,
Oh, wow.
and it offers this temporary escape from just unbearable emotional pain.
Yeah, that puts it in perspective.
It does.
That's wild.
It is.
So like all those PSAs,
Right.
just say no.
Exactly.
That seems very simplistic.
It's like telling someone with a broken leg to just walk it off.
Right.
You're not addressing the real issue.
You're not getting to the root cause at all.
Exactly.
And so it's like we're almost punishing people
Yeah.
for trying to cope with something that they didn't ask for.
Right, and that leads to a really interesting point.
Okay.
Why are certain substances illegal while others like alcohol and cigarettes are not?
That's a good question.
They all have the potential for harm,
They do.
but we draw these kind of arbitrary lines.
We do.
And the material we're looking at suggests that these lines and the way we criminalize certain substances can actually create the cycle of re-traumatization.
How so?
Well, we punish and stigmatize those who are already hurting,
Right.
pushing them further to the margins of society.
wow.
Which makes it even harder to access help,
Okay.
find support, and ultimately to heal.
So instead of treating the cause, we're just
Exactly.
punishing the symptom.
Punishing the symptom.
Right.
And it's that kind of thinking that leads to that question, why don't they just quit?
Which on the surface seems like a pretty simple solution.
Right. Seems straightforward.
Yeah.
But we have to remember the more hurt someone is,
Yeah.
the more desperate they are
For an escape.
for escape, for relief.
Right.
And whether that's through substances or behaviors or even just withdrawing from the world entirely,
Yeah.
it's a response to an unmet need.
So it's about looking deeper and trying to understand What is that unmet need?
Exactly.
Instead of judging
Yeah.
what happened to you.
Right. What problem are you trying to solve with this?
Yeah.
And it shifts the focus from blame to understanding.
Like that.
Me too.
That's a good way to put it.
It really is.
It's a shift in perspective.
It is.
Instead of seeing it as a moral failing,
Right.
we can start to see it as a solution.
A tragically flawed solution.
Yeah.
But a solution nonetheless.
To a very real problem.
Yeah,
That's a great way to look at it.
I think so.
And that opens up this whole other
It does.
thinking about treatment and recovery.
A whole new way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Totally. It really challenges us to think about addiction as a symptom of like a larger societal issue.
Yeah, and it makes you think how many people are out there just silently battling all this pain and trauma,
Uh-huh.
and we just label them as addicts and never even try to understand the why.
It's a really sobering thought.
It is.
And it raises a question about how we even approach treatment.
Right.
If we're just focused on, stopping the behavior
Oh.
without addressing the root cause.
Right, are we really helping?
Yeah, are we really getting to the heart of it?
So what would a more effective approach look like then?
Well, I think it starts with creating a system of care that is trauma-informed.
Okay.
That means providing access to therapies that actually help individuals process and heal from past trauma,
Okay.
not just manage the symptoms of addiction.
So things like therapy counseling,
Right.
maybe even group therapy,
Exactly.
where they can connect with others,
Yeah, where they feel seen and heard
right?
by people who really get it.
Who've been there.
Yeah, who understand what they're going through.
Because, I mean, it's about recognizing that addiction is rarely just about the substance or the behavior.
It's not. It's way more than that.
It's this complex interplay of all these things.
Yeah, biological, psychological, social factors.
So a holistic approach is key.
I think so.
You can't just treat one aspect
No.
and expect some, lasting change.
Exactly. You gotta look at the whole picture.
And that probably requires a massive shift in societal attitudes, too.
Oh, absolutely.
We can't just keep, throwing people in jail
Right.
or labeling them.
Exactly. Labeling them as morally deficient.
Right.
We got to get rid of that. Yeah. We need to move away from that shame and judgment and try to cultivate a culture of empathy and understanding
And acceptance.
and acceptance.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that addiction can affect anyone,
Yep.
regardless of background, socioeconomic status,
Right.
strength of character.
It really doesn't discriminate.
It doesn't. It really doesn't.
So it's about seeing the human being
Yes.
behind the addiction.
The person who is hurting
Yeah.
and seeking relief.
And offering them support instead of condemnation.
Exactly. Meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
Offer support, offer compassion.
It makes me think about what we talked about earlier.
Okay.
You know how childhood trauma can actually alter brain circuitry?
Right.
So if addiction is, at least in part, rooted in these physiological changes, does that mean that it's more of a disease than a choice?
That's a great question.
Yeah,
And it's one that sparks a lot of debate in the field.
I bet.
Some experts argue that addiction is a disease, while others maintain that it's a complex behavioral pattern.
So where do we land on that?
Yeah.
Is there a right answer?
Well, the material we're looking at doesn't really take a definitive stance on that.
Okay.
What it emphasizes is that impact,
Uh-huh.
the undeniable impact of early trauma on the brain
Right.
and its role in shaping vulnerability to addiction.
So maybe it's not so much about the label,
Right.
but about understanding those underlying mechanisms.
Exactly.
Whether it's a disease or a behavioral pattern, the suffering is real.
The suffering is real, and that's what we need to address.
That's what matters.
That's what matters.
So regardless of what we call it,
Uh-huh.
the key is to approach it with compassion,
Yes.
recognizing that pain.
That deep pain that drives it.
This whole conversation's really gotten me thinking about all the different ways that we cope with pain and discomfort as humans.
It is fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
Like all the different ways we try to deal with these things.
Some people turn to substances, other people turn to work,
Right.
food shopping,
Shopping relationship.
relationships even.
Yeah.
It seems like we're all just searching for ways to soothe our anxieties and kind of find some sense of control.
I think you're right. It's like we're all just trying to feel safe and secure
Yeah,
in a world that feels really chaotic and unpredictable a lot of the time.
definitely. And for some people, those coping mechanisms, although they're understandable,
Uh-huh.
become problematic,
They do.
even destructive.
Yes. And that's where that line between healthy coping and addiction,
Gets blurry.
it gets really blurry.
This whole deep dive has really challenged me to rethink my own assumptions about addiction
Me too.
and see it through this more compassionate lens.
I think that's an important takeaway for all of us.
Yeah, it really has. And, it's about recognizing the humanity in everyone,
It is.
even those who are struggling with, behaviors we might not understand or agree with. We've talked a lot about the pain that fuels addiction. But what about the potential for healing? What if understanding these root causes could help us not just treat it, but prevent it?
That's a really powerful idea.
Yeah.
What if we could create a world where people felt truly seen and heard and supported and had access to resources to deal with life's challenges?
Right, in healthy ways.
Unhealthy ways.
Not these maladaptive ways.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, what if we just treated addiction like any other health crisis?
Yeah. Instead of judgment, we offered compassion and support.
Just like we would for someone with a physical illness.
Absolutely.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
It is, and it leads us to think about these alternative approaches to treatment and recovery.
Like what kind of alternative approaches are there?
Well, some experts are talking about a more holistic model.
Okay.
One that addresses the addiction itself, but also the underlying trauma, the mental health issues, and social factors that might be contributing.
And so instead of just pushing for abstinence, we're looking at the whole person.
The whole person and all their needs.
And all their needs, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does, and it could involve all kinds of things. Different therapies, support groups, medication-assisted treatment, even lifestyle changes.
Right, just to kind of promote overall well-being.
Exactly. It's about giving people the tools they need to heal on all these different levels.
And we can't forget about community.
Oh, that's so important.
Right. We can't isolate these people.
No.
They need that connection and support.
Yeah, they need to feel like they belong.
Yeah, like they're not alone.
Absolutely. Recovery is rarely a solo journey.
That's so true.
It takes a network of caring individuals to provide encouragement, accountability, hope.
Right. It's about creating that space where people feel safe. To be vulnerable.
To be vulnerable and supported.
Yeah. So what does this all mean for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway here is compassion. When we encounter someone who is struggling with addiction, let's try to remember that they're not making these bad choices out of malice or weakness. They're probably trying to cope with some pain that we don't even see.
That we can't see.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our perspective from that judgment to empathy.
Exactly. And advocating for a more humane and compassionate approach to treatment and recovery.
Which recognizes that everyone has worth.
Everyone has worth and dignity.
This has been such a great conversation.
It has.
Really eye-opening. I've learned a lot.
Yeah, me too.
I hope our listeners have too.
I hope so. I want to leave everyone with this thought. We've been focusing on the pain that leads to addiction.
Right.
But imagine the potential for healing.
Yeah.
If we could really understand those root causes.
Absolutely. Not only could we help people recover.
Yeah.
But we might be able to prevent this suffering.
Prevent it altogether.
From happening in the first place.
Now that's a vision worth striving for.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes. Thank you everyone for listening.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep challenging your own perspectives.